Called into question whether or not, Vice President Kamala Harris is qualified because you mentioned that prior to her pick, President Joe Biden stated that he will pick a woman and he will pick a woman of color, and you feel as though that undermines her qualifications. Well, my question is, what qualifications does Donald Trump have to be the president of the United States? If Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, then if we're being very honest, Donald Trump is a hire of white privilege because he's not qualified to sit at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. He does not have the qualifications to be the president of the United States. And to be quite honest, Kamala Harris is overqualified to have her position. And so I think that this question of whether or not she should be situated there doesn't make any sense. I'll let you finish. I'll let you finish.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, finish. Yep, sorry.
No, I was saying, one cannot be true and the other not true. So let's just be very clear when we're making those comments.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked. So what qualifies Donald Trump to be president is the fact that he's already been president. Just that little thing right there. The man won a presidential nomination at least once, we'll be generous and say once, and he won the nomination of his party 3 separate times. And how did he do that? Well, unlike Kamala Harris, he wasn't appointed by an old white man, Joe Biden. He wasn't chosen by any single man or a political committee at all. No. He was appointed, chosen by, hired by the American people. And in fact, he was overwhelmingly chosen by the Republicans to represent them as their nominee 3 separate times. So that's what qualifies Donald Trump to be the president. Y'all need to rid yourselves of this idea that what qualifies someone to be the president or to have a high-ranking political office is the fact that they've held a bunch of smaller political offices and held on to them for decades. That's actually not a qualification, nor is it at all what our founding fathers intended. But the truth is, y'all are still just mad that a man who had never held a single political office came in and became the mother freaking president. Y'all are still mad about that one. But really, this is all a moot point because, as I already said, Donald Trump was the president. He ran the country for 4 years, so that qualifies him to be president, unlike Kamala Harris. And of course, we know that Donald Trump isn't a DEI hire because we have it on good authority that straight white men aren't diverse. In fact, we know that diversity is really just code for not white. And bonus points if you're not straight and or not a man. Y'all made these rules. Now you need to play by them. And just because you're delusional enough to believe that white privilege actually exists in 2024 America, and not only that, but exists to such an extent that it is responsible for Donald Trump getting elected to the office of president and winning his party's nomination 3 separate times, just because that's the level of delusion that you're working with, that isn't quite the same thing as us knowing, as you yourself just stated, knowing that Joe Biden said he was going to choose a black woman as his vice president. See, you have no tangible proof that Donald Trump is a hire of white privilege, but we actually do have tangible proof that Joe Biden was openly and actively pressured to choose a black woman as his vice president. So not quite the same thing here, is it? No, it's not. And the minute that you start talking about skin color or gender or whom you're attracted to in the bedroom, you actually do undermine qualifications. You do undermine credentials. Joe Biden is the same man who promised that he would appoint the first black woman to the Supreme Court. And he did. We know where this administration's priorities have resided since day one. We know. And it actually does undermine confidence in that person. The person could be the best, the brightest, the sharpest in the room. But the minute that you talk about the fact that, oh, she's a black woman, look at us, she's a black woman, we were looking for a black woman and we finally found one, you actually do undermine confidence in that person. You do. Not only do you edge out qualified straight white men, but you actively harm the very minorities that you claim to want to help. Because the natural progression of thought, and it really has nothing to do with politics, the natural progression of thought is you're not here because you're the best, you're here because you're a black woman, because they said they were looking for a black woman. You might be the best black woman, but you're not the best because they said they were looking for a black woman, so that's why you're here. It actually does undermine confidence in the person. And the only way to combat this is to go to a meritocracy, where it doesn't matter what skin tone, what gender, whom you're attracted to in the bedroom. All that matters is that you are the best fit for the job. So get rid of all the affirmative action, all the DEI initiatives, get rid of the unofficial pressuring, the universal applauding, get rid of all of it, and just go with the best man or woman in the room. And you know how I know y'all know this is true? Well, you're the ones who whine about white privilege, which means that whenever you see a straight white man in a position of authority, you assume he's not there because he's the best, he's there because he's a straight white man. So you have this exact same progression of thought. And yet, foolishly, you have now made your bed in such a way, and you have to lie in it, that we think the same thing about you, and we are totally justified in thinking that. So again, the only way to combat this is to go to a meritocracy. Speaking of merit, or lack thereof, Kamala Harris, unlike Donald Trump, didn't win a single delegate in the race leading up to 2020. In fact, she dropped out in shame and disgrace. Amy Klobuchar won more delegates than Kamala Harris. Tulsi Gabbard won more delegates than Kamala Harris. Pete, I'm not even going to try to say his last name, won more delegates than Kamala Harris. She dropped out in shame and disgrace. But because, as we've already established, Joe Biden was being pressured to choose a black woman, he chose Kamala Harris. Was she qualified for that position? I don't know. She didn't win a single delegate. She was wildly unpopular. The American people didn't like her, and yet he chose her. Interesting. And now, at the 11th hour, Joe Biden and everyone else has suddenly realized that he's unfit to run for a second term. Never mind the fact that he's been unfit to run this country the whole damn time. We all just suddenly realized that he's unfit to run for a second term. So Joe Biden dropped out, and he passed the torch to Kamala Harris. Joe Biden, for whatever agency he has in this whole thing, and I'm not entirely convinced he has any, Joe Biden and the entirety of the DNC effectively gifted the presidential nomination to Kamala Harris, which is actually not how the democratic process works. We actually don't just have presidents gift nominations to their vice presidents. If we did, we wouldn't really have much of a need for a primary at all to figure out who our nominee is going to be, would we? So you now have a nominee for president of the Democratic Party. Your nominee as a Democrat is a person who not a single American has voted for in that position. She was not in the primary at the top of the ticket. She did not win anyone's support. She did not campaign and win anyone's support. She was shoehorned in. She was installed. She was gifted a nomination. Joe Biden dropped out so late that he disenfranchised voters from his own party from having a say in who their presidential nominee was. And why was Kamala Harris in the position to be gifted the nomination in the first place? Well, because she was the VP. And why was she the VP? Well, as we've already established, it's because she's a black woman. That's the only reason she was in the position to be gifted the nomination in the first place. But y'all aren't really concerned about that, are you? No. Instead, you're concerned about whether we're calling her a DEI hire and whether that's racist, which is pretty damn pathetic. You know, you might, for some godforsaken reason, be excited about Kamala Harris. You might, for some godforsaken reason, be ultimately happy that Joe Biden dropped out and Kamala Harris is in. You might, for some godforsaken reason, be planning on voting for Kamala Harris. But the fact remains that there's only one candidate in this presidential election who was chosen by popular mandate, who was chosen by we the people, who entered into a primary saying, I'm going to run for president, ran a campaign, and won that primary. And that person is President Donald J. Trump. The party that's here to save democracy gifted the nomination to their candidate, installed their candidate as their nominee without the say of a single American voter. And meanwhile, the fascist would-be dictator was chosen by we the people. And that is pretty damning.